Hey Darksiders, how is everybody? I'm back. I'm back from the dead, so to speak. I was down and out. I was sick. Welcome to the channel, by the way. If you are new, my name is Al, and thank you guys so much for the well wishes. I really appreciate it. You guys are so awesome, man. I'm telling you, the best community on YouTube. So my question, though, I wish I could have gotten to this earlier, is are we watching Watchmen? Are you guys checking out the HBO series of Watchmen? The last episode, or the first episode rather, came out on Sunday, and I didn't get to see it until later in the week. I actually saw it twice, but I'm itching to get into this with you guys. So here's what we'll do. We will do a synopsis of the show, and here's where you want to break and just roll out if you haven't seen it, because this is about to be a major spoiling event. But if you haven't seen it, go check it out and then come back, because I definitely want your feedback about what you think about the show. It's really interesting with how this show opens, right? We open in the 1920s and we see a little boy in the theater, and he's watching a movie while his mom is playing the piano, and we find out later in that scene that there is really a massacre going on outside where whites are massacring blacks. The dad comes into the theater, takes the family out into the street, and tries to make its way to this wagon that's on its way out of town. Well, they get to the wagon and they find that there's not enough room for everybody, so everyone can't fit. So dad writes this note and puts it in his son's pocket and puts his son on the wagon in this box, and then the wagon proceeds to head out of town. While the wagon is on its way out of town, we can see that it's being shot at, and we see these holes flying through the box that the little boy is in. Well, later on, it's nighttime, and we find a little boy lying in the field, and we see the debris from the wagon everywhere. So we know that the wagon has been hit. We're not sure how, but we know that it's been hit. The little boy gets up, he looks around, he reaches into his pocket, and he finds a note that his dad wrote that says, "Take care of this little boy." Well, while he's looking at that note, he hears crying in the field, and he finds a little baby wrapped up. Now, we're not sure at this point whether it's a boy or a girl. This is important to note because of something that happens later in the show. But he finds the baby, and he consoles the baby, and then he starts to walk towards the town. And then we jump to present day, where we see a guy that's in a car. He's driving down the street. It's a white guy in the car. He's driving down the street, and he's stopped by the police. So the police stop the guy. The guy is upset about that, spills his drink. The police stop him and ask the guy to see his license and registration. The guy responds to the police officer by saying, "Can I see your face?" Now, at first, you don't know why he says this, and it's an odd comment to make. And then the officer says, "What did you say to me?" And then the camera pans up, and we see that the officer has his face covered. Now, this is a whole interesting idea of what's going on with this show around officers having their face covered. We're going to get to that in a second. The guy apologizes for saying, "Can I see your face?" And officer says, "License and registration." The guy in the car says, "Listen, chill. Everything is cool. It's in the glove. I'm going to reach in the glove compartment and get it." So when he reaches into the glove compartment, he fishes around for the license, and the officer finds something that is a little bit unnerving. Then we jump to the officer getting back in his car, and he gets on the radio and talks to dispatch, and he's asking for his gun to be released. So here's an interesting thing that we find out in the show as well. Apparently, police officers are not allowed to walk around armed, but their guns are holstered, or in fact locked in their police cars, or maybe other places, and we don't know. We'll find out in other episodes. But they cannot have it released without getting authorization to have it released. So he jumps in the car. He's crazy nervous because he wants his gun released. He tells dispatch that when he saw a guy, he stopped looking around in the glove compartment. He saw a Rorschach mask. Apparently, that's not a good thing. So the guy is kind of trying to flounder around whether or not to release his gun. He doesn't get his gun released fast enough. The guy jumps out of his car with the Rorschach mask on, fills him full of holes, and then basically he drives off. Then we jump to the scene where the captain is watching the Oklahoma play, and he finds out the news that the guy, or one of his officers, have been shot. But we find out that the officer is okay, and the chief of police goes to visit him in the hospital after he has a conversation with who I assume is the officer's wife. Now, there's this whole thing going on about the importance of the officers having their face covered, and he asked her questions about anybody having seen his face, or does anybody know what he does, to which she answers no, it's illegal. They think he has another job. Then we jump to Angela, who is played by Regina King, who appears to be giving a presentation at a career fair at an elementary school. And she is in fact talking about her job as a baker. She's answering a whole bunch of questions. And then the question comes up, what did you do before you became a baker? And then she tells the class that she used to be a police officer, but she's no longer a police officer because she got shot. So she goes into this whole explanation about how she transitioned from becoming a police officer to a baker. baker. And here's where we find out where the masks come in and why officers cover their face. So she tells the story that she got shot because she was a police officer. The person that shot her saw her earlier, knew who she was, came to her house and shot her, and they saved her life. And then she's cut off by the teacher for like, yo, this is too much for the kids to handle. And then one of the kids asked her another question about the bakery, and then another kid raises his hand and asks how did she pay for the bakery, and then ask her did she pay for the bakery with something called Redfordations. Now, what it appears is that Redfordations are some kind of reparations that have been paid to black folks for, I guess, what they endured in the past. But you can see she's agitated when that question is asked. And then there's a little girl across the room. At this point, we don't know who she is, but it is a little white girl who gets really upset. She runs across the room, jumps on the kid, and really starts to beat on him for what he said. Then we flash forward and we see Angela and that little girl in the car together, and we find out that that little girl's Angela's daughter. And they're talking about all that ensued, and the little girl says the little boy's a racist, and Angela says no, he's not a racist, but he's well on his way. The whole idea, I think, behind that is that he's really too young to be racist, but if he continues down the path that he's in or on, he probably will end up being racist. Then something strange happens, and maybe you can tell me what this is. I'm going again through the comic book, but I don't remember this. It starts to rain something that looks like squid, and everybody seems to be familiar with this happening because cars pull over and people pop out umbrellas, and when it stops, they just go about their business. Then we cut to Angela pulling up to her house where she sees her husband and another child spraying the squids apparently off the sidewalk. They go inside, they have a conversation. Then Angela gets a phone call, or they go inside and they have a conversation. Then Angela gets a text message that says something about Little Bighorn. She looks alarmed, and at this point we don't know what Little Bighorn is, but we do know that she immediately goes to her bakery. As she's opening that bakery door, there is an old man in a wheelchair that asks her, does she own the store? She responds, yes. And then he asks, when is the store going to open? And she responds, in a couple of weeks. She opens the door, and as she's going in, he makes an odd comment. He says, do you think that I can lift 200 pounds? And she looks at him and says, sure. Well, she walks directly through the store and taps on this panel, which opens a secret door. And then we see her go into the basement. Next thing you know, she's putting on this black outfit. She's fully decked out, face covered in the whole 9 yards. She jumps in this black car, she speeds off, and she goes into what looks to be this trailer park with racist folks living in there. She kicks in the door, she hits and punches this white guy, drags him out, puts him in the trunk, and then goes back to the police station. She goes upstairs and she finds all the officers are convening in a chamber, and they're watching a video about the 7th Cavalry. Those are the folks that are wearing the Rorschach mask, and they're pretty much proclaiming that they're back in business, and for all the liberals and all of the race lovers, they're going to get what's coming to them. So the officers are watching this. The chief of police is there as well, and she's watching this kind of outside of the chamber. The chief of police gives a talk to say that basically we are under siege here and everybody needs to be on the lookout. I forgot what code he called it, but he called it some kind of code. Then he talks to them about what they should do with their firearms. Then he talks about the firearms, and he asks the question of Red, one of the police officers, who apparently is called Red because he wears red and he wears a red mask. Does he feel like his life is in danger? To which Red answers yes. So then he makes the decision to basically go all armed, which means police officers no longer now have to get permission to carry guns unholstered, but they can carry firearms on their side, live and active. Well, before that decision is made, they switch to a guy named Panda who's wearing a big panda head, and apparently he is the lawgiver in the show. He reads some words on a page that apparently are the rules or the laws as to how guns are regulated and the use of guns with police officers, and he kind of gives a warning to the chief that says this is a mistake. Now after that, they all stand up and say some pledge, and then they leave, and the chief goes back to his office where he meets Angela, who is there still in her full black costume with her feet on the desk. And she asked the chief, how come you didn't tell me about what happened? The chief said because he didn't know how she would handle it. They go downstairs and they find the guy in the trunk and they question him. First they question him with just normal questions, and then they put him in something called the chamber. Now a guy walks in the chamber, he has his face covered. Remember, all the police have their face covered. It's a way to keep them safe so no one knows their identity. And he's asking them questions, and while he's asking questions, all of these images images are flashing behind them on the wall. The interrogator leaves the chamber. He talks to Angela and they have a discussion. And Angela asks, is he guilty? And the interrogator says, yes, he's guilty. And he was judging that by the eye movement and the body language, I believe. But he never fessed up to being guilty. So they end up walking the guy out. Angela is apologizing for pulling him out the house and the way she treated him. All of a sudden, she grabs him, jerks him, throws him in a room. She's beating the crap out of him. We don't see that, but we hear it. And we start to see blood run from under the door. And she comes out and the guy is giving her a confession. So as a result of that confession, the special task force goes to this house where there are other members of the 7th Cavalry, and they appear to be collecting something that looks like watch batteries. So they descend on the house. There's a gunfight that happens. A lot of the 7th Cavalry gets killed, but some of them don't. Some of them actually escape in a plane. Now, during this whole time, the captain and someone else is monitoring this raid, but we don't know where they are at this point. This is really cool, actually, what we're about to find out here. But we know that they're close. So they're monitoring this raid. When they find out that there is actually a plane and the folks have taken off in the plane, we find out that they are actually in the ship that's owned by Night Owl. Now, at this point, we don't know how they got the ship. We don't know if they commandeered it, because remember, all of this is taking place after the events that happened in the comic book of Watchmen. So they end up taking out the plane with Night Owl's flamethrower, which I think is a nice kind of callback or homage to that ship from the comic books. The plane blows up, Night Owl's ship crashes, but everybody is okay. Then we jump to a scene where Angela is having dinner with the chief's family and her family, and they're all just having a good time enjoying each other's company. After dinner's over, Angela and the chief are having a conversation about the events that happens, and she says that she's worried, and the chief says he's worried as well, and that kind of ends that discussion. Then the chief and his wife go home, and he gets a phone call that the officer is doing better, and he goes to see the officer. I think the officer had woken up. Chief's wife is a little bit worried about him driving because of the state that he's in, and the chief says, don't worry, I'll get one of the men to drive me to the hospital, but that doesn't happen. He gets in the car and he drives himself. Along the way of going to the hospital, his tires are burst, and then he gets out the car and we find out that there are road spikes placed on the tires, so this was by design. So then we see him investigating something that's going on in a grassy area, and then we just kind of hear some thudding sounds, and then it cuts from that. She was at home with her husband, and she gets a phone call that sounds like the old man that was outside of her store when she was going to get costume up, and the guy was asking, is this your store? He tells her to come to, I think it's Nob Hill, I can't remember the name of it, and come as you are. He tells her, don't wear no mask, I know who you are. So she's really nervous, and she's wondering what's going on. She gives a gun to her husband, says, listen, I gotta make a run. Anybody comes in that driveway that's not me, you shoot him. Don't ask any questions, just shoot him. So she's driving to the hill. She gets to the hill, and then there's a bright light flashing on the car, so she can't see what's happening on the hill. She jumps out of the car, opens the door, points the gun, and says, turn the light out or I'll shoot. So the guy turns the light out, and then she begins to walk up the hill, and she sees that the chief of police is hanging there by a noose, and under the tree is the old man sitting in the wheelchair, the very same old man that asked, do you believe that I can lift 100 pounds? Now, what's interesting to note there, and you got to pay attention because it moves kind of fast, is that old man has the letter in his lap that was given to the little boy when the movie first started from 1920 that says, take care of this little boy. So she's just kind of looking in shock about what's going on, and then the episode ends. Oh man, you guys, you know what? I totally left out the scene with Ozymandias in it as well. So there is a scene in the show as well where we do get a look at Ozymandias, who is living apparently on the countryside kind of by himself with these two servants that are just helping him get through the day-to-day things. We don't know a whole bunch about what's going on with him, but we know he's there for an important reason because they do highlight him in this first episode. So I forgot to mention that as well. So anyway, we can tackle that in the comments if you guys want to jump more into that. That's fine. What I really liked about this show was the way that it's crafted. I like the ideas, the themes that they're playing with, the whole ideas of kind of the inverted approach to wearing masks. Now the officers are wearing masks to make sure that they keep themselves safe. So I like how they're playing with that theme, which is not much different from kind of the theme that we see in Watchmen in the movie, really, and in the comic book as well. So I think Watchmen is really interesting because it's giving a really, really interesting take, again, on the superhero genre, kind of pointing us in a direction that's a little bit different than what we're used to. The same thing that The Boys did. I'm not saying Watchmen is like The Boys, but it gives us a nice different look and take on the superhero genre. I also like the fact that it did make some variations from the comic book. It's not following the comic book beat by beat, and it's kind of strange to me kind of why people get upset about that. I, for one, don't necessarily want to have the same story that I've had in the comic book. I can read it if I want to have the same story. Now, there is something to be said for those classic stories really being depicted on film or TV and kind of seeing them within a different genre, but it's okay to me if the story varies, if it's different, as long as it doesn't decimate the source material and it pays respect to the origins of the source material, then I have no issues with that. I have no issues with them taking liberties with the story either. So I loved Watchmen. I thought it was fantastic. You guys, we are going to cover this every Thursday on this channel. Like I said, I think we have 8 episodes. So what did you think about it? Did you like it? Did you not like it? Did you feel like it didn't pay homage to the source material? How did you feel about the performances? How did you feel about the story? How did you feel about the tone? All that stuff that went into this first episode. I thought that all that was great. I thought that this episode felt very unique and fresh, and it was nice to see as opposed to some of the other stuff that we've seen with superhero content. And I'm using that word opposed loosely, not opposed as in I don't like the other content. It was different than the other content. I'm not really explaining myself well here, but that's what I mean to say. I love it, you guys. What did you think about it? Let's get into it in the comments below. Make sure that you check out more videos on the channel. You can do that right here. And I will see you guys on the live stream tomorrow night, 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time on Sunday. Peace.